This will be a serious talk. I am a scientist, and I am Swiss. You will not laugh. Well, maybe a bit. The original topic of this talk was about Cynefin and understanding why Agile works. Cynefin is one of the latest silver bullets or big fads to be going through the Agile world. I've been working with Cynefin since the early 2000s or so when the first papers were published, and I just don't feel like talking about it, quite honestly. I do feel like talking about why this Agile stuff works, and that's not me. And also in the past half year or so, I've had some personal life-changing experiences, you know the kind, that have got me back to thinking about why I do what I do and what I want to do and what kind of messages I want to give out to people as long as I'm still around to give out messages. Don't worry, I'm still healthy, but at least my doctor says that. But there's a couple of things that I think are becoming increasingly important that somebody talks about them. And that's what I'd like to talk about in this talk. I've renamed it to How Do I Do Real Scrum? There's two questions in there. First is, do I do it? Am I doing real Scrum? And secondly is, how would I do it? And there's an implicit question in there about what is real Scrum. So, as I said, I'm a scientist. I do research. I do research not in a laboratory. I do research out in the field. And there are different types of things I do research on. One of the things that I've been doing research on, doing a lot of thinking about lately is, why is the Lyapunov exponent a scalar? That might be interesting. Does anybody know what the Lyapunov exponent is? That's okay. You don't need to. I will get over that very quickly then. Just have the Lyapunov exponent. Somebody might recognize this. This is the logistic map. And the Lyapunov exponent is, okay, let's try another one. How many people know Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Yes. Now, in the first volume of it's beautiful, it's the world's only 5-volume trilogy. In the first volume, the spaceship, the Heart of Gold, was powered by something which was called the infinite improbability drive. Now, the Lyapunov exponent is essentially related to that. It's a number that tells us how much chaos is in a system. That's about it. And if you do a Lyapunov exponent analysis on the logic map, you get a whole bunch of numbers that you're not able to read from back there. But don't worry about that either. I think it's an interesting thing that I'm trying to relate to entropy and dissipative systems, and essentially seeing, I have a theory that there's ways that you can measure the self-organization of a team that maps onto this. So that's about what that's about. So let's leave that for a while. There's another very interesting research topic that I've been working on that you're going to love this one. Does doing Agile cause alopecia? That's loss of hair. Now, I went back and I looked at some people through my career who, do not laugh, I'm a scientist, this is a serious talk. Looked through my career at some people who've influenced me very strongly. And I dug out a couple old pictures. These two gentlemen were a very early influence on me. Big question of beer for anybody who recognizes them. If these guys didn't do what they did, none of us would be here. May I introduce you to Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie, inventors of Unix, both of whom were good friends of my father, who influenced me to start looking at this stuff analytically at a very small age. Now please notice the amount of hair and the fact that with increasing age, it migrates, like birds migrate in the winter. It migrates down from the top, down to the bottom of your face. A couple other gentlemen who when I was older, I had the chance to work with, who also influenced me very much, are these two gentlemen. You should be able to recognize maybe at least one of the two of them. That gentleman there is Ward Cunningham, and that guy there smiling is Kent Beck, and he's smiling because he caused me to lose a lot of the hair that I still had back at that time. Yet another gentleman who, although I have some differences with his thinking nowadays, has also influenced me a lot, is this gentleman, Ken Schwaber, who invented Scrum. Are you starting noticing a statistical similarity amongst these pictures? So let me give you another example, sort of a before or after. This is another interesting gentleman some of you may recognize. This is before he started working as an Agile coach. Now, if Vasco, can you stand up? I'm sorry, oh, he is standing up already, but there he is in the back. Look at him now. So I think I'm starting to prove this hypothesis also. Very interesting things happen when you start calculating statistical correlation coefficients. Things like this relation of intelligence to hair. The excuse you need is that for some of us you have to choose between brain and hair. Right? This is a serious talk. There are some other interesting correlation coefficient things that we've noticed recently. One is between global warming and the number of pirates in the world. I just thought I needed to bring that slide in. We notice as the number of pirates in the world has decreased over time, that the average global temperature has increased. So there must be something here. I'm still not sure what it is yet. Now, one thing that Vasco and I have been doing research on and getting a lot of people angry about, we like doing that, is doing work on estimating. And if you've ever read his blog or talked to him about that, you know that we've had a lot of interesting, provocative conversations about that. But this is also something that he and I, along with a number of others, do research on. We don't sit there in rooms and think about these things, we actually do it. Right? Those who can do, those who can't write books and give talks about it. So I consider myself one of these people who does the research that other people then write books about. But in any case, this is a contribution to Vasco's work from another friend of ours, Dave Nicolette, who's also a researcher in this sense. And this is about his idea about estimating. I hate slides like this, but there's a lot of them. How many elephant points are there in the veld? Well, let's conduct a poll of the herds. Herd A reports 50,000 kilograms. Herd B reports 84 legs. Herd C reports 92,000 pounds. Herd D reports 24 head of elephant. Herd E reports 546 elephant sounds per day. Herd F reports the elephant skin RGB values of 192, 192, 192, which should have been done in hex. Herd G reports an average height of 11 feet. So we're 50,000 plus 84 plus 92,000 plus 24 plus 546 plus 192 plus 11 equals 142,857 elephant points in the veld. The average herd has 20,408.142857,143 elephant points. Now we know this is a useful number because there's a decimal point in here. Don't laugh, this is scientific research. As I said, this is a serious talk. So, one of the things that anybody who knows me at all knows that I've been doing and researching since the mid-late 90s is the question, why does Scrum work? This is a subset of the question of why does Agile work? So let's just concentrate on Scrum now. There's an easy and a more complex answer to this question. The easy answer itself is quite complex because the easy answer says this question is actually two questions. The first question is why? And philosophers have been asking this question for thousands of years, as you know. The second question is, does Scrum work? And the answer is? Yeah. Come on. Okay. Yeah, thank you. They're filming this, remember. Okay. So, I believe in doing this stuff. Who here is a coach or a consultant? Please raise your hands. Okay, I just want to know how many people I'm insulting here. But I know these guys and I'll buy them a beer afterwards. I used to do a lot more of that stuff too. Work as a trainer, a coach and consultant, and I found Well, for me at least, actually doing this stuff is more fun than talking or writing about it or teaching or coaching it. There's a big difference here. That difference is taking responsibility. There's a big difference between coming in and saying, do this, don't do that, and then leaving. In comparison to going in there and sitting and saying, this is what we are going to do, and putting your butt on the line, your reputation on the line, and being in there for 6 to 9 months. Not as a coach or a consultant, but in an actual working position. It's a big challenge, and there's a lot of stuff I learned doing this. Right? So it is more fun to do it, but hey, it's a lot harder to do it than to talk or write about it, or to just go in and give a course or coaching. So point number 1, take this along. You can put this up on Twitter if you want. If you're doing Scrum by the book, you're not doing Scrum. You're following a religion. Think about it. Okay? I have a good friend of mine. Alan Atlas is also one of the first Scrum trainers. He was the guy who brought Scrum into Amazon. He was responsible for, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Amazon S3 platform. He ran the Amazon S3 project at Amazon. And went off, worked as a trainer, worked as a coach, a consultant for a while, and he also gave up with it. He's now doing the similar thing that I'm doing at Momox at a company called Scanby in New York. He's just gone in and started to work as a CTO to put his ass on the line. And one thing that Alan said, that you have to adapt all the time when you do Scrum in the real world. And this is one of the challenges we have, is doing this stuff in the real world. Because, take a look at this. Officially, I am a certified Scrum trainer. Do you know what that means? That means by the power in me, I can put out my hands, put them on your shoulders, and I can certify you. Wow. Cool, isn't it? But hold it. There's all this stuff that I teach in these courses that I now have to go in and see, does it really work? And I'm putting my reputation on the line. There's a big difference there. There's a big difference between what Alan and I are starting to call fairy tale Scrum. Fairy tale Scrum is the stuff that you've read in the books. There are a couple books out there that do the same stuff, where you hear in the courses, and that's where your product owner is really smart and he's there all the time for you. Your management totally supports you. People do not have to work on 2 projects at once. They're totally focused, and of course you have a full-time Scrum Master. All right? Guess what? In the real world, this doesn't work. So what does someone who is I have to do a little bit of advertising. I do training occasionally, so I am a trainer. I'm talking about all this stuff in my courses. How do I go about doing this in real life? And this is one of the things that I've been thinking about for a long time. In my courses, I've also gotten away from just talking about the practices and how to run your stand-up meeting and all that type of stuff. But essentially, to do this stuff in the real world, you go from Cinderella to Sun Tzu. When you go in, you kick ass. This is not about doing Scrum. Your goal isn't to do Scrum. It's not like the school where you get that gold star in your notebook if you do all the meetings, and then you do all the XP practices. And, hey, I do 12 of them, you only do 11, so I'm better than you. Your goal is to kick your competition in the butt. And all's fair in love and war. Scrum, XP have proven in certain incarnations, certain implementations to be very good tools to do this. But what happens if you can't do that by the book? How do you go about doing it? So, I've been thinking about, and this is what I've been teaching in the few courses I've been teaching over the years, based on my work as a scientist and a researcher, how to teach people to actually do this out in the world and be successful with it. And I've gone back to some basic ideas that I had, some basic stuff that I learned. Question, how many of you have attended a certified Scrum Master training? Okay, well there's still some potential for me to do a course here sometime. Since I don't know most of you, I'm assuming you probably did your course with someone else. How many of you did that exercise in the beginning where you have to run around and take so many steps in 2 minutes and stuff like that? That type of stuff, right? Yeah. From a complexity point of view, that's one of the worst examples of local optimization. It's a very bad exercise. But it does show something that's really interesting, and that's I'd love to go off now and talk for about 3 hours about socially complex systems, but I don't have the time to do that. But let's talk about birds and how birds fly, because it's getting to be about that time of the year when the birds are going to start migrating north to south. Now, how do birds migrate north to south? Well, it's obvious. The first thing they do is they go to the airport and they file a flight plan, and they check the weather reports, and they sit down for a pre-flight briefing and plan, according to seniority, who gets to fly at the front, and how long they have to fly before they have to take their union-mandated breaks. All right, everyone. Actually, the birds don't understand this. Birds fly according to 3 simple rules. First rule, don't bump into each other. That's bad. Bumping in is bad. Second rule, fly at the same speed. So if you see that they're all in front of you, you better start flapping your wings. If you don't see anybody because they're all behind you, then slow down a bit. And the third rule, fly towards the center of the flock. Now if you try to fly at the same speed and fly towards the center but don't bump into each other, you'll start flying in parallel. Behavior in complex systems, very complex behavior patterns, can emerge as a result of following a couple very simple rules. Now there's a challenge doing this with people because we don't like to obey rules, right? Come on, how many of you obeyed all the things your parents told you when you were a kid? It doesn't. Oh, he's sucking up already. But there are a number of rules that I found that by understanding those, by living those, you actually generate your Scrum practices from them. And then you find out what your goal is, what you're actually trying to do. And if you can't do the Scrum practices the way they're in the book, you know how to adapt them. And that's what I'd like to show you. Or what are some of these basic rules that will help you understand what is it really about in Scrum. Okay. So this is about the time I'm going to turn this off. I want to go over here and show you something. This is a tree. If you didn't recognize it, it's a tree, okay? This is the Tree of Scrum. So what we have up at the top is all that stuff that you think that Scrum is. Practices. What are your practices? They're your roles, your product owner, your Scrum Master, your team members. They're your meetings. They're your artifacts and all that type of stuff, right? Let's forget that for right now, because that's not what Scrum is really about. The tree that this grows out of are some core principles. And if you do this right, your tree will be fruitful. You have a whole bunch of fruit there, and you release that fruit, it falls down, it comes out, and magic happens, and everything is good. Right? You like that, didn't you? Get that stuff outside, he's selling it. Really does look good. Yeah. Okay. And no, I'm not getting those for free, but I think they're very useful. Okay, next thing down here, just for completeness sake, the roots. Right? Are our core values. Core values: commitment, focus, openness, respect, courage. Those are the things, if you don't have that, if your management's not living that, you're never going to be agile. Right? But there's something between that and here. Understanding these principles, a couple very simple rules, which will let you generate and do all the right practices for you to get better. Okay? So, this is going to be really simple. There are 3 rules and 3 questions. Okay? Rule number 1. We don't make mistakes, we learn. A large part of the problem that we have in our daily life is due to the fact that we have been punished for learning experiences. This is the point where if I had another hour, I'd get to tell you some interesting stories about retrospective coherence and complex systems and that. We just can't know everything in advance. But it's expected that we know things in advance, that we always know what the right thing is to do. But guess what? It doesn't work that way. When we get punished for doing things wrong, we'll tend not to do them again. Right? Skydiving is a very good example of this. But think about it. Think about this punishment. Okay, how many of you have a child that does not yet ride a bicycle? Your child still has to learn how to ride a bicycle. Oh, Vasco, you're going to have a problem, man. Because think about what happens when you learn to ride a bicycle. Well, you start out with a small bicycle with these training wheels on it. And then as you learn, get better at riding it, your father moves the wheels up a bit higher. Now if he's like my father, he'll do it in the middle of the night where you don't notice it. And the next morning when you come out and say, Daddy, weren't the wheels lower yesterday? He starts talking about optical illusions and things like that. Now, and you have to understand something. I love my father, I really respect him. He introduced me to guys like Thompson and Ritchie. My father's a research nuclear physicist, which means that when it got time to take off the training wheels, it wasn't just let's take them off. It was my first lesson in trigonometry, which says that, look, if you put the bicycle on the side, the training wheels will only touch the ground when the bicycle's laying on its side, so it's not going to help you. Yeah, great. That really convinced me, didn't it, right? So what happens? Daddy puts you on the bicycle, gives you a little push, you go a couple meters, you fall down. Comes, picks you up, dusts you off, fixes the bicycle, and says to you in his nicest voice, "You stupid idiot, you'll never learn." How many of us would be riding bicycles if our first experience riding a bicycle was like that? Nobody. Think about it. Do you want to get your teams to learn this stuff, to be agile? Think about how and why babies learn to walk. Why do babies learn to walk? 3 things. First, everybody knows it's possible, right? Nobody doubts that it's possible. Secondly, they're not expected to run a marathon with the first steps, right? And third, they get positive feedback for every little step they take. Those are the 3 reasons. And I think, wouldn't it be a lot easier if, a mother had a little kid and walks along with it and holding onto it and leaves go. The kid walks a couple steps, falls down. The mother would just say, hey, why don't you just stay down there? Otherwise, later in life, you'll have a bad back like Joseph does. Just stay down there. No, what does the mother do? Picks Brad up again and walks a couple more, leaves it go, falls down, picks it back up again, leaves it go. It starts looking like bungee jumping, right? Down and up and down and up and down and up. It'd be a lot easier if you just said, hey, stay down there. Cats and dogs like it down there, so there must be something good down there. Right? No. Everybody knows it's possible. Nobody expects perfection in the beginning, and you get positive feedback for doing this. Right. First rule, if you can't predict the future, and if you're in a complex system, you can't predict the future, if you can't have a fail-safe system, you must create a safe-to-fail environment. You must create a place where it's okay to learn, where it's okay to get better, where it's okay to correct yourself, and continuously be able to do that. That's the first. Okay. Another question. Let's take an example. Stefan, is your boss here? Okay. Can you just turn out your ears for a second? Let's imagine Stefan's boss would come into him and say, look, Stefan, I have this big stack of work here. I want you to do this work. Take a look at it. I'll be back in 2 hours. Tell me how long you need to do it. So Stefan takes a look at it. Because he's so good, he says, hey, no problem. I'll get that done easily in under a week with one arm behind my back and stuff. He's really good. So a couple hours later, the boss comes back in and says, Stefan, did you look at this? How long do you need to do it? How long would you tell him if he wasn't sitting here right now? 1.5 weeks. That's good. I would have expected. Would you have said 2 weeks if he wasn't here? Why does this happen? We all know this joke. Be honest, most of us have done it ourselves, right? Why? Because we don't want to be punished for what is a learning experience. We can't know how long it's going to take. This is an example of retrospective coherence. In the beginning, you never know how long something is going to take. Afterwards, you know how long it took, and you know exactly why. But if you don't get it right, you're going to be punished by having to work nights and having to work weekends, right? So we have to set up an environment where it's okay to say, hey, I just learned something. And because of that, I realized there's an easier way to do this, or I realized that we're going to have more problems. That's the first rule. Second rule goes back to the fact that we all know from Stefan's example that when we say 1.5 weeks, what happens? Boss comes in and says, no, that's much too long. I need it done in 3 days, right? So, whoever carries the risk makes the decision. Now, who would be carrying the risk of having to work nights and weekends? You, right? Who makes a decision about how long to take? Someone else. And where's he going to be on the weekend? Not out there drinking beer, right, with friends. How often do things happen that people make decisions for things that they carry no risk and no responsibility for? Figuring that out is really important. It goes in both directions, right? It goes in the direction of customers and managers telling a developer how long they have to do something. In the other direction, it goes equally well. The developer says, oh, that would be cool. Why don't we put that in the product? That's really important. That can go as far as, think about anybody here a product owner? Okay, a couple of you. What do you do when a developer overshoots his estimates? Ever think about that? How long will you let a developer overshoot his original estimate before you do something? Because what the developer is doing implicitly, he sees taking over your job. He has decided that something's more important. And at the cost of something else not getting done, he's going to work more on this. What do you think about that? Right? You've just changed who's taking the risk and who's making what decision. Third, this is a simple one. If it's not fun, you're doing something wrong. Why did we get into this business? Did we get in to be rich and famous? We're rich, okay, we're earning more than if we were at McDonald's or something like that, but famous, depending on the companies we work for, you might be able to boast about that. Well, you know, guys, did you get in because of the chicks? Same thing works for women, of course. Why did we start doing this job? We started doing it because originally it was fun. But I'm not going to even ask the question of how many of you are having fun with your job. I don't want to see that answer. I've seen the painful answer day in, day out at other companies. But this is something we have to set up an environment where it's okay to learn, it's okay to have fun, and it's okay to take responsibility. That's the first step, are these 3 basic rules. Now, I'll let you do the exercise of figuring out where in Scrum we set up the balance of power and how we set up these environments. It goes on, there are a couple more things. Let's see, how am I doing for time? Okay, I still have a little bit more time. In addition to the 3 rules, I have 3 basic questions that also come up. These are sort of diagnostic questions. And let's take a look at these. Yeah, you know the problem taking pictures, you never have enough space here. The other problem is always this. When do you want to know that you have a problem? After 2 weeks in a 6-month project? After 2 years in a 6-month project? When do you want to know you have a problem? How many of you work in big companies? Please raise your hands. Okay, for those of you, please leave out the first word. For the big companies, it's just, do you want to know you have a problem? Big companies are very good in pushing and ignoring this stuff. This is one of the earlier you know this, the more advantage you have, the more flexibility you have, the more resources and everything. And also, getting back to, remember that first rule? Right, the first rule saying that we don't make mistakes, we learn. We want to create space for learning, but we don't want the company to go bankrupt because of it. So what we want to do is we want to have a feedback loop that tells us as quickly as possible that we're going in the right or we're going in the wrong direction. Right? So it's obvious we have these feedback loops. In iterative development, that's the whole idea behind iterative development, and we break things down into days. Right? We break our releases down into sprints, break our sprints down into days. My teams work in even smaller increments, that we get even more and even better feedback so that we know we're going in the right direction, and if we have to change, the change is smaller. So this one comes from my dear friend Beck, and I remember talking a lot about this with him when the 2 of us together did the first extreme programming project in Europe back in 1998. Long story, I could tell you about that over a beer, but one of Kent's sayings back then. How much are you prepared to throw away? How much are you prepared to invest in planning, analysis of specifications, design and all that stuff, when you don't know what's going to happen next week? How much risk are you willing to take there? The idea that we had when we started with extreme programming, I remember the question that I used to start my XP talks with was, what would you do different if your client could only pay you for 1 day development? What would you do different than you're doing now? Especially thinking that at the end of that day, if you could give him something he could earn money with, he could pay you for another day. What would you do differently? And then you start thinking about, okay, maybe not 1 day, maybe about a week or 2. You can actually start getting a little bit done. The goal of not sitting there planning and trying to guess what people want, but getting something out there, learning how to deliver, and testing to see if that's what your customers want. And that gets back to the when do you want to know you have a problem. Getting that feedback as quickly as possible. There's a whole bunch of economic and other reasons involved in there, but just figuring out, how much are you willing to invest if you don't know where the world's going to go next week? And third question, this is a big question mark. What is this telling me? What does this mean? Getting better means constantly keeping your eyes and your ears and all your senses open and learning, seeing what's going around you, but also looking into yourself and questioning yourself. And I apply that to everything I do. Let me give you one small example here. This gentleman here who's copying my hairstyle. I don't know if you saw, he came in as one of the last ones here. Lazy bugger. And do you work with him? Does he get to meetings on time? Meetings on time. Does he do good work? Okay, so this just might be a one-off. Lazy bugger. No respect at all. Okay, have a beer afterwards. This is an example for a communication protocol that's known as OIC. And OIC is a very good example of this. OIC says, I started with an observation. I saw you came in later than others. Based on that, I drew a conclusion that you're a lazy bugger. Now this conclusion, there's a middle part of the sandwich here. It happens as a result of an interpretation, that I'm interpreting your behavior. Now why do I interpret your behavior that way? Well, it's because I'm Swiss and I have a Swiss watch over there. And I wanted to start on time, right? Because of my value system, I'm interpreting it this way. Now, if we take a look, that has to do with you. That stuff below the line doesn't have anything to do with you at all, right? It just has to do with me. And as long as I don't start questioning my values, questioning my interpretation of situations, I'm never going to get better. Continuous improvement. What can I do? What can I learn? Why am I interpreting things? What can I gain from interpreting and understanding them differently? For me, those are the core principles. If we had time, this is stuff I talk about in my courses that we go through, and then we start mapping the practices of Scrum onto that. And if you think about the stuff a little bit, you can maybe realize where things start fitting along. If you want, come up afterwards. I have a couple little cards here with this stuff on it. If you want to take that along, it help you think about it. What does Scrum really have? What is Scrum really trying to do? What I'm trying to do is implement these principles. And doing Scrum, doing the original set of practices is a good starting point. But it's only a starting point. It's not your goal. It's a starting point. Start out by doing something like this, okay, by the book, as a learning experience, right? Let's say you're not going to make mistakes, you learn, and start questioning what you learn from it and what you want to do to make it better. But adapting the stuff first, because otherwise you'll lose that chance to learn. Learning is something that takes us outside of our comfort zone. We need to do that first. But if you're not able to do your meetings by the book, if you're not able to have your roles by the book, don't give up. Scrum is a very good tool for complex systems. Get back to this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to implement a system to do work in an extremely complex environment. And what you need is to set up the environment where you can learn, where you're getting rapid feedback on it, where you're continuously improving, and where you're having fun. That's what it's about. And there's one last thing I'd like to give you before I stop. And this is something that I've been working on, thinking about for a long time now. I haven't yet fitted into the core principles, but something I've found really fascinating. And that's learning how to separate the what you're doing, the why you're doing it, from how to do it. Let's say this is your company up here in the world. So it's the world. Let's add some world here. Now, what do you want to do with your company and why do you want to do it? What you want to do at that top level is earn a lot of money. Unless you're a charity, probably your goal is access to earn money. Why do you want to earn a lot of money? I'll let you figure that out. How do you go about doing that? Well, in most cases, you go about doing it by thinking about a product, could also be a service, but a product that you could offer people that's so cool and so good that they're willing to buy it from you, which means they'll give you the money for it. All right? That's good. What do we want to do? How are we going to do it? We choose to put together some kind of product. Now watch this. This is going to be really cool. Circle around to the next lower level. And our how becomes the what. What do we want to do? We want to bring out a product that people like so much that they'll buy it from us. Okay? How do we do that? In most cases, we'll do it by defining a set of features that people will think are really cool, and then implementing those features, right? So, what do we want to do? We want to define a set of features, prioritize them, and then have them implemented. How do we go about doing that? How do we go about getting these features implemented? Well, probably you're going to have to take them, break them down into stories, and you're going to have to break those stories down into tasks and implement them, right? So, what do you want to do? You want to implement these tasks. How do you go about doing that? Well, if you're at this conference, you know the best way to do it is to sit down and write your tests first, and then write your code, right? So, what do we want to do? We want to write a set of tests and code. Now, how do you do that? Now, if you're really smart, you do it in small talk. But let's not go there for now. What we have here, at every level, this how becomes the what and the why for the next lower level. What we get here is a spiral or 3D, it's a helix, right? This is the screw that holds your organization together. You don't need to take a picture, I just blogged about this. All this stuff is up on my blog. I said I have to get back to blogging eventually. At every level, this becomes that. Now, this is a great way to motivate people, is by telling them what you want, why you want it, and let them figure out the how. Especially geeks, they love riddles, they love puzzles. So you tell me what you want, let them figure out how to do it. And actually, if we go a little bit further, there's a great format for that. It's a format that tells somebody what you want and why you want it, but doesn't tell them how to do it. Guess what that's called? The user story. As a blah, 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 I want. What do I want? So that. Why do I want it? Doesn't, a good user story doesn't tell you anything about it. That leaves out this how as a puzzle. Which means there are user stories at every level. Logically. There are these user stories, those are the ones we know. There's a next higher one here. There's something that we call a sprint goal, which says that my goal for the sprint is this. How's that user story implemented? That's implemented by the team taking a subset of features or stories here that they think they're capable of doing and committing them to that, etc. So there are also user stories up here at the top level. Now, an interesting thing to see here, and it's the last point I want to bring, is that I said whoever has the risk decides. Now, what we see here is that there are multiple levels of risk. There's a risk up here, right? There's a risk strategically in saying that we're going to choose to bring out some product instead of selling hamburgers. Right? It's a strategic business risk that somebody has to take. That's somebody up here at the top, that's your CEO. There's a strategic thing saying this is the product we want to do, the strategic risk here in saying this is the features that we want to prioritize. There's a risk here, right, in choosing the proper implementation of it. There are different levels of risk, right? Now, one thing to understand here is the fact that if you have that guy up here at the top, who's responsible for that, right, your CEO or something, what happens if this guy starts making decisions down here? What do you call that? And so, this micromanagement, right? Where somebody's making decisions for things that he does not carry a direct risk for. The other direction is a bit more difficult, as we all have noticed trying to talk to our bosses sometimes. So the last question I want to leave you with, to really get you thinking. Right? A lot of times I used to be called into companies to say, we want to do Scrum. And most of the consultants, I don't want to insult you guys, I'm insulting the other ones out there, say that, we want to start doing Scrum. Okay, I have to start next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, I can come. Right? That's a lot. I've stopped doing that. I said, if you figured out that, then you probably don't need me anymore. You can get someone else who might be cheaper or something. What I'm trying to figure out is, for me, Scrum is not the what to do anymore. Scrum is the how to realize something. So the last question I want to leave you with is, Scrum is the answer. What is the question? Thank you.